Welcome to Sarder TV, an idea-sharing platform founded by Russell Sarder, who's an author, investor, and the CEO of Netcom Learning. We're excited to have Carolyn Dewar join us today. Carolyn is senior partner at McKinsey & Company, and she's also the author of a book called CEO Excellence, The 6 Mindsets That Distinguish the Best Leaders from the Rest. And she's here to tell us more. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
It's super to have you. Thank you so much.
So you've been with McKinsey & Company for about 21 years now. Tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone comes to McKinsey or into consulting thinking they'll only do it for a couple of years. And so it's always surprising to realize how long you've been. And I think it's because I've just had a chance to try different things over time. And so I joined fresh out of university as a business analyst, spent a lot of time in financial services and now in tech, and have had a chance to lead a couple of our practices around organizational change and effectiveness, now in the strategy practice. And so it just always has kept it fresh. And I feel like it's all come together in this latest piece I'm getting to work on around CEO and board excellence.
Yeah, so tell us about that. Tell us a little bit about your role as a senior partner and the many hats that you wear.
So I still have a regular day job as a senior partner where I lead a lot of clients on their big strategy and transformation efforts and things like that. But then for the firm broadly, I've been leading a lot of our research and our client work on the CEO role specifically, right? What is the role? What makes it exciting and hard? And how can we really support CEOs against the 4 stages of the journey, right? Folks who are in the few years hoping to be a candidate, folks who are new in role, that kind of mid-tenure, what do I do next? And then importantly, thinking about handing over the reins, right? And both imagining what's next for you, as well as getting your successor ready. That role has ended up being so pivotal for organizations. And so helping people get it right is where I spend a lot of my time.
So how long has this practice been in existence? When did you start it?
I think CEO counseling is something we've always done for almost 100 years as the firm, and it's because of that access and that sort of grateful position we've been able to be in that I think we've been able to develop some real pattern recognition around what works, what doesn't, what advice. We formalized it a few years ago to really sort of be able to share those insights with our clients, but it's something we've always done.
You also have written a book called CEO Excellence. And you had an opportunity to interview several CEOs, some of the top CEOs in the world. So tell us a little bit about your book and what it's about, and sort of the research methods that you use to go about writing that book.
Sure, absolutely. It's been a huge privilege to be able to be part of it. And a lot of people have asked, why did we feel the need to write the book, right? You think there's a lot of autobiographies or biographies out there about specific CEOs, right? There's also a lot of research broadly on leadership, right? And there's even research on CEOs specifically on, time management and calendar management. What do CEOs do? And I think the piece that we found missing or that we wanted to contribute is when you look across CEOs in general and really think about those who've excelled in the role, what sets them apart? What's different about those who've really been able to take this fascinating and difficult role and do something incredible with it? And so as you would imagine, we took a very rigorous, disciplined approach to trying to identify what makes an excellent CEO and then spend time with them. We, from a research methodology point of view, we took all the CEOs that have been CEOs of Fortune 2000 companies since the start of 2000. There's about 4,000 of them. We whittled it down to the top 2 quintiles of performance relative to your peers. So we wanted to normalize the fact that, tech company performance might be X versus another industry. So within your industry, have you been in those top 2 quintiles? You had to have been in role for at least 6 years because we wanted to make sure you'd been around long enough to eat your own cooking, right? It couldn't just be a fly-by-night story. And then we put them through a number of screens on reputation and other factors to make sure we felt really good, and ended up with a pool of 200 CEOs. And of those, we were able to spend time with almost 70 of them and really sit down one-on-one for 2 and 3 hours to kind of get behind the curtain of what really is the job and what do you do that set you up for such success.
How long did it take you? It sounds like quite an endeavor.
It was. It's been the last couple of years spending that time really one-on-one with each of these CEOs, sometimes going back multiple times, but a huge privilege. In a way, one of the benefits of working remotely that we've all had is we've been able to meet everyone in this way. And so that's one of the silver linings. So it's been a couple of years in the making, and we weaved it with a lot of the database that we built over a couple of decades on performance and different factors, and brought the stories together with the data to hopefully contribute something pretty insightful.
So who would benefit from reading this book?
Sure. I mean, the easy answer is obviously CEOs themselves or folks who aspire to it. I think there's been, even in the CEOs we talked to, many of which have been in role for a decade, they said, wow, it's interesting to be able to learn from others, right? So that's an easy one. But frankly, I think anyone in a leadership role, so many of the lessons learned apply broadly to all of us. And in a way, looking at this sort of most complicated, biggest scope role, it kind of sets the bar high, but you can easily translate the learnings for wherever you are.
There was an interesting statistic that was mentioned in the book, and that's 30% of Fortune 500 CEOs last fewer than 3 years, and 2 out of 5 new CEOs are perceived as failing within 18 months. Tell us more about this.
I think the CEO role has always been challenging. I think it's getting even more so, right? So we did dive in to say, why is it so hard? The first piece is interesting. 50% of new CEOs say it's not what they expected, right? And so there's something about until you're in the role, you don't know what it is. Bill George at Medtronic said, you think you know because maybe you ran a big business or led a big geography. You were basically a COO compared to all of the extra pulls on your time as a CEO. I think the breadth is huge and only growing in terms of the scope of the role and the complexity of the role. And I think the scrutiny has grown as well, and that's probably why tenures are shortening, right? We're just both investors and other stakeholders broadly are a lot less patient about mistakes, right? And so being able to get out the gates early on a good path is increasingly important because people are watching, right? And the stakes are too high not to do it well.
Have you seen this 10 years ago or previously? Are these statistics just different now than they were?
Well, the tenure of a CEO role has certainly gotten shorter in the last 2 decades. I think some of the stress levels have increased. And even in the last few years, through the pandemic and a lot of the social issues that have come up and a lot of the dialogue, I think both the scrutiny has increased, the visibility has increased, right? Everything you do is amplified internally in your company and externally. And the stakeholder management is very real, right? And so a lot more voices now have a say in how are you doing and are you focusing on the right things? So certainly it's gotten even more challenging for what was already a really difficult job.
So, your book is about the 6 mindsets that distinguish some of the best leaders from the rest. What are those 6 mindsets that you've identified?
Sure. And I think even this notion of mindset is an important one. It was easy to start cataloging what are all the behaviors of what does so-and-so do? How do they manage their time? What do they do? And I think what we realized is actually stepping back from all of that. These exceptional CEOs actually just think differently. And if you're able to anchor on the mindset, the 1,000 behaviors then stem from that. Right? And there was two levels of difference. One is in terms of the role overall, yes, they have to set direction, manage their team, manage the org, the board, stakeholders and themselves, but really they see the role of CEO as the ultimate integrator across those things. It's not that they're going to be the best at any one of those 6 roles, but they have a unique role to play in spinning all those plates at once, right? And understanding the interdependencies, calling out when things are fitting together or not. And that's actually a unique mindset and skill set of itself, right? And then in each of the 6 areas, there was a way of thinking that really unlocked. I can share a couple, I won't go through all 6. One would be around in setting direction, setting strategy, right? Those who were really exceptional, I think, showed a boldness. They were willing to be bold in a way that was quite unique. And you think about even just framing what game is the company trying to play, right? What does winning look like? They really reframed, hey, we thought winning was this. It's actually this much bigger stage. Ajay Banga at MasterCard, when he took over 10 years ago, they were very focused on beating the competition, right? MasterCard versus Visa. And you think back 10 years, early days of electronic payments and all those things, he looked around and he said, well, the vast majority of transactions in the world are still cash. So the game we're not playing shouldn't just be, or isn't just us versus Visa. It's actually, how do we kill cash? And so as a CEO, he was able to boldly reset the company and say, this is the game we're playing. And we're not a credit card company, we're a technology company, we're a transactions company. And that had a whole ripple effect down through the organization. He had the courage to do that.
So are there any sort of trends or things that you noticed across all the CEOs, one or two things that all these CEOs that you sort of interviewed had in common?
Sure. I do think these mindsets were the common piece, whether it was founder-led, family-owned, public, private, across, right? They all just thought differently. If I pick off another of the six, how they thought about the board, right? The prevailing wisdom, is the board is something to be managed, right? They're there to protect against risk. They have and I need to give them enough information, and it's another pull on my time. These CEOs, almost to a T, approached it very differently. They said, well, the board, I should engage with my board. If done well, this is an incredible resource to me. If I have the right people on the board and I give them the information so that I can have the directors actually help my business. That was the mindset around board, right? Help the directors, help me, help my business. And it was quite different. And it leads you to Hubert Joly, Jamie Dimon talk about radical transparency with their board. That's quite different than this notion of, tell them what they need to know versus I'm an open book in good times and bad, which means when you have to come to them for the really tough decisions, you already have that baseline of trust, that baseline of transparency, and they know enough to know how to be helpful.
What are some of the other key findings as you were interviewing these CEOs that you think could really be helpful to the audience?
I mean, there was the board piece, the boldness on strategy. I would say as they thought about their organizations and their team, there was a huge recognition that, this job is too big for someone to carry on their own. It's only effective really in that it empowers everyone underneath them to be able to be excellent at their jobs. And so they spent real time and thought thinking about how to get the best out of their organization. Right, Satya Nadella, not only did he make a big move into cloud, one of his other big moves was the culture shift that he led. And it wasn't broad values-based, it wasn't a list of 10 things, growth mindset. He picked one, he saw how it was going to be an unlock for the organization in terms of their silo thinking, their openness to new ideas, their openness to test and learn. And he spent real time, right? He expected it of his leaders, and he made some pretty bold moves for leaders that weren't role modeling that growth mindset. He talked about it all the time. He shared it when he made a mistake and had to grow, and some of them were very public mistakes. He came back to his organization and he said, wow, I messed up. Here's how I'm going to grow. Here's how I'm going to learn. And so he took something that could have been a very soft thing, the soft stuff, and he made it the hard stuff. He gave it rigor, measurement, time. And that's something I think all of us could do.
Is there any one story or one CEO that, as you were interviewing, you felt really resonated with you? A story that they might have shared, or an experience, or something in the way they might have led?
I mean, I think there are so many, right? We talked to 70 folks, which was incredible. And some of them are the classic names you'd recognize, right? Reed Hastings, Satya Nadella, Mary Barra at GM, all of these big names. I think some of the interesting ones were the names that were not household names, but that still had delivered incredible performance, right? I think about Doug Baker at Ecolab, a kind of industrial cleaning company, right? And what he did around purpose, which again can be quite a sort of soft topic. Is this a pretty poster on the wall, right? There's lots of talk of purpose. And he said no. In fact, one of his quotes was, you can't do evil 9 to 5 and then, be a good person in the evenings and write checks, right? Kind of a stark analogy. But what that meant for him is they really took their ESG commitment to heart. In a company that, cleaning products and industrials, might have not been on the right side of those issues, right? And they said, how do we really operationalize that sense of purpose? How do we build ESG into our day-to-day, not in the volunteer work we do on the weekends? And they got very serious about some of their water conservancy and how that was built into how they did their work, how they coached some of their clients on different practices. And it became very authentic to who they were. And that was inspiring.
Tell us how culture plays a role in some of the organizations that the interviews that you did and the organizations that are considered some of the best in the world.
Absolutely. Culture came out loud and clear on the top of mind for the CEOs that we talked to. And three main reasons. One, it actually matters to performance, right? So there was a recognition that how we work, how much friction there is in the system, the kinds of behaviors that we have in our organization meaningfully drives performance, right? It can either drive or get in the way of innovation, efficiency, customer centricity, all of these things we know to be important. I think the second is, in particular, when driving change, it's the number one reason why big change efforts fail. Is the culture. People don't change their mindsets and behaviors. And with so much rapid change in the world, I think CEOs realize we need to pay attention. And the third one is really how employees are looking at organizations. I do think it's one of the shifts that's been happening over the last decade or more, where employees have choice. They're choosing where they want to work. And one of the significant factors is, what is it like to work around here? I think we're seeing it to a T in the return to office, right? People are really challenging some of those assumptions. And so it's a very timely issue, right? And one worth getting right.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen that organizations face when they're trying to change their cultures?
I think the first piece, and we started there, is being clear on what the shift or shifts in culture are that they're trying to drive. It's very easy to get long lists of things or to over-index just on employee engagement, as opposed to saying, how do we need to run the place? How do we want to work together to enable the business outcomes that we're going for, right? And what's working well and what's getting in the way of that. And so being quite clear on what are the elements of culture that matter and what does that look like? Again, not just in the soft stuff, but in the hardwiring of our incentives, how we interact, as well as obviously the skills and the role modeling that set the tone. But you need both. You need both pieces of, is the message clear? Are they seeing it from the top? Do they know how to behave in the way you're asking? And is it hardwired into all of our systems? So, or at least they don't get in the way.
Tell us a little bit more about the role that leadership should play in culture change.
I think culture change cannot be outsourced to HR. Right? It is a leadership and business issue. And all the way from the top, whether it be CEO or the leadership team, they have to believe it. So they have to believe the culture change is important. They have to be willing to role model it themselves, right? Even if they think they're already doing it. You need to go out of your way to be very visible and setting the tone and frankly, the permission for people to behave in this new way. So how are you out there taking risks and showing you're behaving differently? And then making sure that it's filtering down through the organization, right? And so, and it's both what, the positive frame, which is the more helpful, is what do we want to be, but also being clear on what won't we tolerate. And there does need to be a line in the sand. And it gets very real when that goes up against trade-offs. What if your highest producer is someone who does not role model the culture that you're excited about in an organization? Are you willing to make that tough call? I mean, those are the signals that ricochet around an organization.
How did you see the leaders that you interviewed for this book kind of take on that role that might be a little different than, some of the other CEOs out there?
I think first of all, they were willing to get out of their office and walk the halls and walk the talk on the culture change, right? They to a T, and this is broader than the culture point, for the most part, they made sure they had leaders who were running the day-to-day business so that they as CEO could pop their head up and do the things only the CEO could do. Some of it was managing culture, setting the tone, talking to employees broadly. Some of it was the external work that they had to do. Some of it is frankly having the think time to look ahead and be the strategist and look around corners and say, where do we need to go as a business? If you have your team in place and the operating rhythm, that it's largely running, other than when you need to intervene and inspect, it lifts you up and enables you to do all these other things that are so important.
One of the things you help CEOs with is in resetting their personal operating model. Tell us what that's about.
Absolutely. And this is one we spent real time on, and frankly is one we get a lot of questions on from CEOs themselves. They all want to know, how do I manage this job and what does it look like? And again, there's sort of a hard and a soft side to it, right? The harder side is literally, how do I manage my time and my energy, right? These are all consuming jobs. What are the tips and hints? I think the main mindset for that piece is really doing the work that only you can do as a CEO, right? So really thinking about, how do you empower and enable others to do everything possible so that you have time to do some of this integrative work and forward-looking work that won't get done if it's not for you. So that's sort of one piece of it. They also manage the whole journey as a series of sprints, right? Especially if you aspire to be in the role for a long time. It's more than a marathon, right? Because it requires a level of pace and delivery. It's also, you can't just do a single sprint and sprint forever. And so how do you think about these cycles of sprint and recovery? And that's within your day, your month, and across years, right? So some of them are quite savvy in understanding what gives them energy and what drains them. And it's not as clear as work versus outside of work, right? You know, some things at work excite me, laundry drains me, right? So it's not just that stark. But they would work with their EA and their other folks to look at their calendar and say, do I have enough things throughout my day and my week that are going to give me energy, as well as all of the tough stuff? And they were actually quite deliberate about scheduling their day and their weeks and their months and their year. Most of them scheduled out a year in advance, right? They already knew what that calendar would be, to make sure that they have these periods. And I think the same is true in their leadership of the organization broadly, right? We've all just been through this enormous sprint of the pandemic and all of the pivots that were required. And they're asking, how do I help my organization catch their breath, be resilient, build their reserves ready to go on the next S-curve, and being deliberate about that for themselves and for others.
One thing that we wanted to touch upon was the changes that occur when organizations get acquired, merge, and some of the changes and shifts that are experienced at that time, particularly, again, around culture and the melding of the two to make sure that they all work together. What have you seen are either some best practices or things that sort of ensure that it's a smooth transition from culture to culture?
It's a big one, right? And one, I mean, it's rarely a merger of equals, to be honest, and it's sort of disingenuous to say that. And so some of it is being clear early on, you know, are we choosing A or B, or are we creating a new C together, right? And that requires some honest discussion about who are each of the two organizations, what are their cultures, and what are the elements that we want going forward, and making sure you dive beneath just the language. I think about one client that was a massive merger, and when they looked at their value statements, the posters on the wall, they looked almost identical, right? Integrity, client focus, you know, all of these things. One of them was, people are our competitive advantage. And when you looked at the two organizations, they both had that as a phrase. It actually meant quite different things. So in one organization, having our people as our competitive advantage meant, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to give you a big job, lots of rope, let you shine. Obviously, there's accountability if you don't, but hey, have at it. Go for it. You're our best people. The other organization still very much believed people are our competitive advantage, but their interpretation was, we're not going to let you fail. We're going to put a lot of scaffolding around you. We're going to make sure we coach you. We don't give you too much so that you could get out ahead of your skis. Same value expressed very, very differently. And it's only when they were willing to have that conversation. First blush, there was a bunch of misunderstanding. I thought you cared about people. Why are you doing that to so-and-so? I thought you liked your people. Why are you not trusting them? And you had to talk about it. And they got very explicit about what they wanted them to mean in their go-forward model. But you have to be willing to have those conversations.
What would you say, or how would you say leadership and leadership styles changed during the pandemic? What did you see?
We dove into that one explicitly. There were four things, at least, that we saw in talking or heard as we talked to the CEOs. One is this notion of thinking 10 times bolder, right? And so we've witnessed now that companies and whole ecosystems can pivot on a dime. Now, they did it out of necessity. But now that we know we can take our 5-year digitization plan and accomplish it in 3 months because we had to, where else do we want to have that kind of urgency, right? And I think the more interesting question on that is what enabled us to move so quickly, other than just the pure adrenaline of the moment? And would we want to apply that to other things, right? There was rapid decision making. We skipped levels, right? We didn't wait for things to go through 7 levels of approval. So that's one, boldness. The second is the multi-stakeholder view. So just a whole recognition that gone are the days that we're only solving for shareholder, right? It just became very clear the knock-on effects of decisions on their employees, on the communities they operate in broadly. We've got to factor it in. The third one is really about, the CEOs expressed it as their to-be list as being as important as their to-do list. I think we all became very aware of how we showed up as leaders and how important that was. There was a humanity to seeing inside people's homes and being able to be accessible in a way that was actually quite refreshing. Not everything was polished and pre-recorded. I think people liked that, right? And so how do we want to be more human going forward, and what does that look like? And then the last one was a little bit surprising, but it's more the importance of peer networks outside of the company. And so, there'd always been CEO forums and roundtables and business roundtable, all of that. During the pandemic, leaders showed up to those and they really engaged. And I think part of it, they realized that the crisis they were facing was one that no one had ever navigated before. And they needed to problem solve real time with their peers on how they were going to get through it. You think about, climate change and some of the other crises and things coming up. These are big, complex problems. And I think there's a recognition that no one person sitting on their own in their office can figure it out, and that we need to all put our heads together.
You also have written a number of articles, and you continue to write a number of different thought pieces. Some of your most popular, most read include the CEO's role in leading transformation and the irrational side of change management. Can you tell us more about these?
I think a lot of it is what we were talking about. Change is really hard to drive, right? And it's not just an IQ-oriented decision. You have to be willing to really get into the hearts and minds of the employees that you're trying to shift. Not just do they understand the change, do they have conviction? Do they believe in it? Are they seeing it from people that they look up to? Do they feel confident that they'll be able to be successful in the new model, right? As adults, we can be really sneaky. If we think we're not going to be good at something we're being asked to do, we usually come up with a reason why it's actually just a bad idea, right? If you try and get me dancing at a wedding, I won't say I'm a terrible dancer, I'll just find something else to do. That's kind of the resistance we see in change. And I think the excellent CEOs are really realizing the unique role that they have to play and that leaders have to play in creating that space, building the confidence and supporting people to behave differently. We're not coin operated, right? You can't just pay them differently and expect the whole thing to flip. We're a little bit more complicated than that.
There's another article that you wrote around closing the gender gap in the C-suite and some of the progress that we've made around that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. This is a ongoing thing that I think we're all working on. Almost two flavors. One is, when we were doing the interviews for the book and we have these 67 CEOs, we were mindful and wanted to make sure that we had a diverse group represented. It wasn't easy, right? There aren't enough CEOs from diverse backgrounds right now. And it does raise questions about what are those leadership qualities that we're valuing in those roles? How much are we going or relying on old patterns of what a CEO looks like, how they act, how they think, and how can we be more expansive in that? I think that particular article was anchored more in when you're a new leader in your role, CEO or not, there is a unique window or moment where you're likely going to reset your team. And it's a bit of a once in your tenure opportunity to really mix it up on your team and to not miss that window. And so when you're resetting your team and thinking about who that's going to be, are you thinking boldly and broadly about, what are the skills that matter? How do those show up? And am I just kind of going with the with the usual folks because it's easy.
Anything else that you could talk about when it comes to your book and some of the mindsets that you saw? Any other case studies?
We've talked through a bunch of them. It's on setting direction. It's about being bold and really having the courage to be bold, right? On the org piece, treating the soft stuff as the hard stuff, giving it the real rigor, especially with your team. This flip around board and really saying, how do I have them help the business? That applies to any stakeholders you may have, right? So even if wherever you are in your organization, rather than thinking about everyone as a pull on your time, say, well, how would I use them as resources, right? How would I actually pull them in and help them to help me? I think we talked a bit about personal effectiveness. The one we didn't as much is the stakeholder piece. And so especially all these external stakeholders. How do we think about engaging with them? Who do we have to engage with? On what topics? What does that look like? I think this is something that has really shifted over time and is expanding. And a lot of CEOs are wondering, what is the mental model to know, am I supposed to take a stand on this issue or not? What does that look like? And I think those who are navigating it well are starting within their four walls, right? At minimum, a defensible place to start is, here's what you can count on us for as a company. Here's what we stand for. Here's our values. And here's how we're going to live those day to day. There might be things in the world that you like or not like, and some employees are different than your customers. I think Brad Smith at Intuit did well. You imagine he's sitting here in Bay Area, very much a blue state. And after the election 5 years ago, a lot of his employees wanted him to make a statement about how terrible this was. And he was very clear, and he said, look, first of all, we have, we're a democracy, and that's a vote. Secondly, we have customers in blue states and red states, and that's who we're here to serve. What you can count on us for at Intuit are these principles of inclusion, these principles of what we stand for. It's a delicate balance, but I think one that people are learning to navigate.
Some of the best advice you might have received as you were going through your career that you might be able to share with our viewers?
Probably one piece of advice, which is why some of these mindsets resonate so well with me, is there is a point in your career, at McKinsey, it's when you're sort of in your first management type role, where you could feel like you're at the center of this hub, almost like a stretching machine with the clients want one thing, your team wants something else, your boss wants something, and you just feel like you're stretched and stretched. And someone gave me the advice of, what if you reversed all those arrows, right? What if you thought of your team as a terrific resource and people who could help? Your bosses are actually trying to be helpful, but maybe they don't know how, so they're doing it in ways that aren't. So have you actually shared with them what would be most helpful? Even as you're working with clients, how do you think of all of that as a resource to help advance the work that you're all collectively trying to get done? And to me, that was a real reframe. It was an example of a mindset of, oh, wow, okay, it's my job to kind of pick up the baton and lead this parade. I don't need to get trampled by the parade, right? And if I get everyone pointing in the right direction, we can all accomplish a lot together. And I think the CEOs just do that at a scale beyond.
Amazing. Well, any final thoughts on your book,
No, so terrific to talk to you. I think, hopefully this has broad leadership applicability. I think that's what we were excited about. Both demystifying the role so it doesn't seem like this, mystical thing, but there's so many lessons learned that frankly apply to all of us. So
sure.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. This was great.
Absolutely wonderful to meet you.
You too. And we'll see you next time on Sarder TV.